Greetings, Peter. This is your instructor, Mr. Lampley, for Paraclete Academy's Modern Biology 10, Part A. I am reviewing your recently submitted assignment, which was the Chapter 1, Section 1 section review. This is a video review of your homework assignment so that we could go over it and let you know how you did and what I'm expecting in the way of answers. Okay, so the Section 1 questions, I expect a complete answer. That is to say, using part of the question as your answer, either in the beginning or the end. The critical thinking aspect of the section review, not only do I require a complete answer, but I also require a reflective answer. This is where you're going to use more thought to connect the material that you're learning in the section with the question, perhaps offering your opinion, offering examples that you can use to further reflect and sort of flesh out the question, or at least the answer to that question. That's what I expect for the critical thinking aspects of the assignment. One or two sentences will not cut it, just to let you know. Okay, but we'll go over that area when we get there. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's get started. I do want to say, actually, before I get started, that I do see growth, I do see improvement, I do see your paper, your papers and your assignments little by little in an increasing manner, moving toward the formatting requirements. Your penmanship is improving. You're also putting more thought behind the answers to your questions. I appreciate that, and I commend you for growing in that. At the same time, I also recognize that there is room for additional growth. That's something that we want to continue developing and cultivating in your writing skills. Okay, and not only in your writing skills, but in your mental ability to reflect upon whatever subject that we're talking about, in this particular case, biology section reviews. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. Question 1 states, how does biology affect a person's daily life? So we want to make sure that we're writing neatly and cleanly. We also want to make sure that we're using proper spelling so that there is no misunderstanding of words. Okay. The answer that you give is biology affects a person's life by which foods are healthy. So looking at this, I do see that you are using a complete answer format, and I appreciate that. Even the answer that you give is not a bad answer, but I believe that more is required to really kind of think about that answer. Okay, so biology, how does biology affect a person's daily life? Well, biology affects a person's life by which foods are healthy. So that's kind of, I think we need to go a little further into what we're looking for on that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring the PowerPoint, and I'm going to, in that, I'm going to go over some parts that I think would be helpful in sort of answering that question. Okay, so the questions, the answer to that question, of course, we learned that biology is the study of life. Some things that are studied by biologists are how living things work, how those things interact with the environment, how they change over time. So, and this is, I'm sure, is where you got that answer from. So biologists investigate subjects that affect the way you live. Which foods are healthy? How much exercise should a person get? How to avoid getting sick? So those are certainly, so your answer was not a bad one. I think what I would like to see is a little bit more reflection, even though it's a section question as opposed to a critical thinking one. So we can see further that biologists work to improve food supply, curing disease, preserving our environment, right? So they help us make informed decisions on issues that affect us in society. So moving this out of the way, how does biology affect a person's daily life? Well, one thing that you could say, for an example, would be biology affects a person's life by informing them about which foods are healthy, which foods are not. That would be a way in which you could provide a more reflective answer for how does biology affect a person's daily life. So close, and I'm not going to mark the answer wrong because it is a right answer, but I think just kind of developing what we do with that, which foods are healthy. So biology allows a person to make an informed decision about the foods that they eat, to make better health choices, and to be knowledgeable about making better health choices in regards to the food that they eat. That would be one example of how biology affects a person's daily life. Okay, biology affects a person's daily life by informing them in regards to better food choices or more healthy food choices. Okay. Question number 2. Question number 2 states, how does biology affect society? Okay. So the answer that you provide is that biology affects society by improving our food supply. So that's good. That's actually a good answer to that question, because biologists work hard to improve our food supply, to improve the quality of our foods, which is what your answer for question number 1. So by improving our food supply. That is true. And you did good with that. Question number 3 states, name the characteristic shared by living things. So name the characteristics shared by living things. So you write as an answer, the characteristics shared by living things or living thing are, so remember that we're using good English, okay? We need to use proper English, and we need to make sure that we're writing in a manner that is not jumbled or hard to read, and I have to admit that some of this is hard to read, okay? The characteristics shared by living things are organization, response to stimuli, homeostasis, growth and development, metabolism, reproduction, and change-time, which I think you mean to say change over time or change through time. Okay, and you would want to write that whole thing, change through time. That is, other than just some English, like some writing issues, that looks good, and I'm not going to mark the question wrong. Okay. Question 4 says, summarize the hierarchy of organisms in complex multicellular organisms. So question 4 here, and what I would want you to do is I would certainly want you to write the complete question. Okay, it looks like you made some abbreviations and skipped a few words. I don't want you to do that. I want you to write the complete question as it appears in the book in the section review. That question is, according to the book, summarize the hierarchy of organization found in complex multicellular organisms. And the answer that you give here is multicellular organisms are tissue or organs, I think, and the cell. So that's partially true. Okay, so let me just go ahead and bring the PowerPoint back where we can take a look at it and provide you with the answers that you're looking for. So here we do see that organization. So you need to offer complete. Oh, actually, that's a different answer. So here's the organization hierarchy. So the highest level of the organization hierarchy is the organism. So for an example here we have the owl. The second level down from the organism are organs. Organisms contain organs. Okay, and then a definition of what that is would be helpful. Okay, and then the next level is that organs are made up of tissue or have tissue. Okay, and then tissue or cells, right? So if we look, we can see that tissues are made up of cells, the 3 requirements of a cell, and I think that's where you stop, but you need to go further, okay? So you didn't do the complete hierarchy. So from here, next level, we know that cells contain organelles, and a definition of the organelle would be helpful. Organelles are tiny structures that carry out functions necessary for the cell to stay alive. The next level down would be biological molecules. Okay, and we see that biological molecules are compounds that provide physical structure, bring about movement, bring about energy use, and bring about other cellular functions. And then from there, we see that biological molecules contain atoms. Okay, and we see that the definition is that atoms are the simplest particle of an element that retains all the properties of a certain element. So that is what I would be looking for in order to answer that question. So you start out, I would want you to completely answer the question, which is provide the hierarchy, so that's the highest level, and then this is a definition of what an organism is, okay? And then you would continue through to the next level of hierarchy and the definition, the next level of the hierarchy and the definition, realizing that the tissues are made up of cells, okay? And then from there, that cells contain organelles, and then the definition of an organelle, and then organelles are made up of biological molecules, and then the definition or properties of biological molecules, and then from there, the lowest level, or the smallest level, if you will, the lowest level would be atoms, and then the definition of the atom. That is what I am looking for as far as answering number 4. So first you're going to write the complete question, and then you would list all, the hierarchy is all of the levels. You only actually answered maybe 3. And there are a lot more than that, okay? So let's continue. Question 5. What are the different functions of homeostasis and metabolism? And you, again, abbreviate the question. You need to write the complete question. Question 5 from the book states, what are the different functions of homeostasis and metabolism in living organisms? Making sure that we understand the question properly will allow us and give us a better chance of giving the correct answer. Okay? So write the full question. Do not take shortcuts, Peter. Okay? So your answer is that the differences between homeostasis and metabolism are homeostasis is a maintenance of a stable level of internal conditions. Metabolism is the transformation, or the which is what I think you meant, the transform of energy, the transformation of energy. That is actually a really good answer. Okay, I liked the answer, and I like that you actually answered the question. You showed the difference by stating what homeostasis is, and then what metabolism is. Okay, so you start with the definition for each one, and that's actually a pretty good answer. If you wanted to go a little further, well, basically you did that though. You defined what homeostasis is, and you defined what metabolism is, and the differences between the two. So I'm going to accept that. That question is not wrong. Okay, or that answer, excuse me, is not wrong. Question number 6: how does the growth of living and non-living things differ? Okay, so and that is you kind of abbreviated again. You need to write down the complete, accurate question to make sure that we're getting the right answer. How does the growth among living and non-living things differ? Okay, so you write here that living things can respond to stimuli, non-living things or thing cannot. Okay, that is the difference. That is a difference between living things and non-living things. So you're right about that. Living things can respond to stimuli, and non-living things cannot. That is true. However, Peter, that does not answer the question. The question was, how does the growth of living and non-living things differ? So the answer to that question, okay, would actually be under growth and development on page 8, okay? And I would recommend that you do a little bit more research in that section. So we can see that living things do grow and non-living things also grow, okay? But generally the difference between the two is that non-living things, when they grow, it's the same element, and it usually compiles on one another. Like for an example, snow can grow. If we move to Idaho and you see snow falling, the snow kind of, builds up into a pile and gets taller and taller and taller. That is a form of growth, but snow is not a living thing. So, non-living things, the difference between the growth of a non-living thing and a living thing is that non-living things, when they grow, just accumulate the same element, whatever it's made out of, okay? Like a rock, or like rocks or a mountain, or like snow, for an example, right? It just kind of piles up and piles up and piles up and gets bigger, right? Now, a living thing, the difference between a living thing is that living things grow and develop through reproduction. And there are 2 types of reproduction. There is sexual reproduction, and then there is asexual reproduction. So that would be the difference, or how does the growth of living and non-living things differ? Living things grow through reproduction. Non-living things grow through accumulation, okay? Or just kind of piling up and piling up and piling up, right? So I think that I've answered that. If there's any more questions in regards to that, please don't hesitate to reach out to me, okay? Number 7, why is reproduction important? Okay, once again, we shortcut the question. You need to write the entire question. Why is reproduction an important characteristic of life? Why is reproduction important? And why is reproduction an important characteristic of life are 2 different questions, really, Peter. So you need to make sure that you're writing down the complete question so you can answer the right question. Okay, so that your answer is right. Your answer for question 7 is reproduction is a gene or DNA. Well, that certainly, it doesn't really answer the question. Okay, why is reproduction an important characteristic of life? Well, the reason, and once again, we want to use complete questions, which you didn't do here. You did not use a complete answer. Okay, reproduction is an important characteristic of life because without it, the species cannot survive. Okay, so you may remember in the reproduction section of section 1. That's on page 9. Okay, that it's not necessary for a living organism to reproduce in order for it to continue living in and of itself. It doesn't have to reproduce itself in order to continue living. But living organisms do have to reproduce in order for their kind or their species to survive. So the answer to this question, for an example, if the world were just men, or if the world were just women, the human species would die off in a few generations, and there wouldn't be any more, because that's not how we reproduce. We sexually reproduce. Okay, and that's between a male and a female. So the answer to this question is, why is reproduction, an important characteristic of life? Well, reproduction is an important characteristic of life because without it, the species could not survive. That would be a complete answer. Okay. So let's go ahead and let's go to the critical thinking section, okay, and move forward. So critical thinking, okay. You'll notice that there are areas that there are words that are emboldened and they're in the color red to let you know what kind of a critical thinking question it is. So when you write the question, you need to write the red part, you need to write the type, and then you need to write the full, complete question so that you get a hint as to what type of question it is, so that you can know what type of answer you'll provide. And then with the complete question, you'll know how, you'll be better prepared to answer that question. So here with the critical thinking number 8, we see that it's an applying information question. This question is wanting us to apply information that we've learned. So the question is, crystals of salt grow and are highly organized. Why don't biologists consider them to be alive? So we're going to have to reflect on some of the things that we've learned, right? So one of the things that we would need to know is we would need to know what are the 7 characteristics of life. Okay? And we need to know that the crystals, even though they grow and are highly organized, right? So that would be 2 properties. We also need to know the other properties. So any organism that is a living organism, a living thing, shares all 7 characteristics of life. So crystals here, crystals of salt, they do grow, but remember that growth is accumulation, right? Piling up of the same element as opposed to reproduction. And they're highly organized, but they don't respond to stimuli. They do not have a homeostasis. They don't seek homeostasis. They don't have those internal conditions in order for it to continue to live, right? It doesn't have a metabolism. Okay, it's not made up of cells. Even though it is highly organized, it's not made up of cells. So the quick answer to help us write the right answer is crystals of salt are not considered by biologists to be alive because they do not share all 7 characteristics of life. And then I would want you to name those other characteristics that crystals of salt do not share with other living things. All living things share all 7. The answer that you provided was that biologists don't consider crystals to be alive because they are salt. That's a lazy answer. That's a lazy answer. And I need you, now this is critical thinking. This is one sentence. And I've stated to you that one sentence is not good enough. It's not sufficient for you to do critical thinking. Okay? So an example of an acceptable way to answer this question is to use part of the question, so we want to be complete. Crystals of salt grow, although crystals of salt grow and are highly organized, biologists do not consider them to be alive because they do not share all 7 characteristics of life. For an example, and then list the other characteristics of life that crystals of salt do not share. So you're going to have to know the information that you're talking about, and you're going to have to be able to think about it and put it out in sentence form. One sentence, Peter, in a critical thinking area section is not sufficient. And this question here, your answer, biologists don't consider crystals to be alive, so I see that you got that, and you're attempting to make a complete one, but you say because they are salt. That is a lazy answer. It is not acceptable. The question is wrong. Okay? 9. Analyzing models. So on this one, we're going to be analyzing models. When a scientist designs a space probe to detect life on a distant planet, what kinds of things should it measure? Okay, so once again, now I thought that you actually gave an interesting answer, but it's not complete. The distance between the planets. That is not a complete answer. And actually, it doesn't even answer the question. Okay, so you got lazy on me again. Okay, don't do that. All right? When a scientist designs a space probe to detect life on a distant planet, what kinds of things should it measure? Okay, so let's think about this question for a moment. Let's reflect on it. Let's unpack the question. So, scientists are designing a space probe, and the purpose for the space probe is to detect life on a distant planet. So, if the space probe's purpose is to detect life on a distant planet, what kinds of things should it measure? Well, we know from the subject, so think about that. If this probe is trying to detect life on a distant planet, oh, I see what you did. See, you wrote the question wrong, Peter. When a scientist designed a space probe to detect planet distances, so you switch the words. So you need to make sure, so now your answer makes sense. See, I'm reflecting to figure out why you wrote what you wrote. And that makes sense. When a scientist designed a space probe to detect planet distances, okay, not a distant planet, like the question asks, you write a question, you just change the question completely. You talk about planet distances. So it makes sense that according to your question, which you changed, which is no longer the question in the book, your question is, well, a space probe is supposed to detect planet distances. Well, naturally, they would want to measure the distance between the planets. That makes perfect sense, and it answers that question, but it doesn't answer the question in the book. You've got to write the correct question. Question 9 says, when a scientist designs a space probe to detect life on a distant planet, what kinds of things should it measure? Well, the things that the space probe is designed to detect are not planet distances, as you wrote. It's supposed to be designed, according to this question, to detect life on distant planets, which is to say planets that are far, far away from ours. So if this probe is designed to detect life, what should it measure? Well, the answer to that question is we know that biologists have determined 7 characteristics of life. So if the probe is designed to detect life on a distant planet, some of the things that it should measure is some of those 7 things. Does whatever thing that's on planet whatever, let's just say Saturn, which is a long, far away from our planet, do the things on planet Saturn have a metabolism? Do they have homeostasis? Are they organized, highly organized and composed of cells? Do they reproduce? Do they change through time? Those would be some of the things that a space probe designed by a scientist to detect life on a distant planet, those would be some of the things that that space probe should measure. I hope that makes sense. So the idea here is we're applying models, right? So they're giving us an example, and they're wanting us to think in that example about these 7 characteristics of life that biologists have determined or have discovered are consistent with all living organisms. Okay, I hope that makes sense. If it doesn't, you need to reach out to me. Okay, so that we can talk further about that. Okay, last critical thinking question. Okay, how are cells and organisms different? So the question says, making comparisons. We need to write the complete question. Both cells and organisms share the characteristics of life. How are cells and organisms different? So you just write down the last part. How are cells and organisms different? When you need to write the whole thing down. And owl tissues are different than a human's cells. So that's true. That is true that owl tissue is different than human cells. That is true. But we need to go further. Once again, critical thinking. More than just one sentence is expected from you. So you would use a complete answer. So you need the full question so you can use part of that question as the answer. And then you're going to provide the answer, and then you're going to use an example. So let's work this out a little bit. Let's reflect. Okay, how are cells and organisms? So both cells and organisms share the characteristics of life. How are cells and organisms different? Okay, so we could see if we bring back the PowerPoint, we can see that organisms, if we go back to the top of the hierarchy, we can see, sorry, that's not it, let's go back. You know what, we're going in the wrong direction. Let's try that again. Okay, so organisms are made up of organ systems. Okay, so let's remember that part. An organism is made up of organ systems, okay? And cells, tissues are made up of cells. Cells must be covered by a membrane, contain all genetic information necessary for replication, and be able to carry out all cell functions. So the difference between a cell is that a cell is what makes up tissue. That's what makes up organs. And different organ systems make up the organism. So the organism, which is the owl, is made up of several complex, highly organized organ systems. Okay? For an example, one of them is this ear. The owl's ear is an organ, and the organ is a structure that carries out a specialized job within an organ system. For an example, this owl's ear is designed specifically to allow the owl to hear. that organ is made up of tissue, which is made up of numerous amounts of cells. So the difference between a cell and an organism is that organisms are made up of cells. Okay, so cells are made. Cells are what make up the organs. So organs are made up of cells. I guess that's the best way to say it. Sorry, I ran low on caffeine. Organs are made up of cells. Okay? And although organisms contain cells, organisms are made up of several organ systems. Ears, for an example, that allow the owl to hear. Eyes, for another example, that allow the owl to see. Okay. A mouth, right? So there's, a mouth isn't really an organ, but, a tongue, if you will, that allows it to taste. So there's all these other different organs. A heart that allows blood to be pumped and transferred throughout the body so that the body, gains nutrients, through the blood. So there's all these different organs that several different organ systems that make up the organism. Now those different organ systems are made up of organs, and those organs are made up of tissue, and the tissue that makes up the organs is what is made up of cells. So I guess another way to say it, since we're kind of reflecting on it, is that tissues in cells, if you will, are the building blocks of tissues. But the organism is sort of the full system, right? So a cell is the building block, if you will, of tissue. Tissues are the building block of organs, right? And then organ systems, the collection of organ systems that are designed to carry out certain functions in that organism, is what makes up the organism. That, I hope that is helpful. Let's try it again, just real quick. I don't want this to go too much further because we're on the last question, but here, and we've already been going for over half an hour. So again, making comparisons. What's the difference between a cell and an organism? So cells are the building blocks of tissue, which are the building blocks of organs, and then you have several different organ systems, right? So these parts, these body parts that are designed to do certain things. Eyes, ears, skin, heart, lungs. All these other different things are organs that are made up of tissue that are made up of cells, right? So cells are the building blocks for the organs, but the collection of organ systems together, working together, are the organism. I hope that that makes sense. If that doesn't, we can certainly talk more about that. But just to kind of work through this here, I do see growth, but there's room for more. Your writing needs to be clear. It needs to be neat. You need to write the complete question. You need to offer a complete answer. When you reach the critical thinking aspect, you need to write the part in red, what type of question it is. You need to write the complete question, and you need to offer, for a critical thinking question, not only a complete answer, but a reflective answer. These questions are going to really force you to think, and they're going to want you to think and reflect on the differences of these things. So you can list the difference, and then you should provide an example like I did on the last question, talking about organs, talking about tissues, talking about cells, talking about how the cells are the building blocks, and how they are what make up the tissue, which makes up the organs. And then an organism is a collection of these organ systems, each with their own specific thing that they do, working together in this entire being called a living organism. And I use the owl for an example, and I use those different organs like eyes and ears for an example. Okay, that's what I expect on the critical thinking. So you're gonna, some questions are wrong, and I'll provide a grade for you. You're gonna get some grace because I know that you're growing, but you need to step into that role of providing for the section review questions, complete answers, writing the complete question, and then for the critical thinking questions, complete answers and reflective answers. Okay? You're doing good. Proud of you. Keep growing. Keep doing. Love you. And I'll see you next assignment.